Hello everyone and welcome to our latest conversation on onshore wind. We've been doing a number of conversations with partners and lawyers around the firm here talking about onshore wind because we're due a resurgence in onshore wind with the opening up of England again to these types of projects. Of course, they've been going on the last few years in Wales and Scotland and continued, but there seems to be a real enthusiasm to look at projects now across the whole of the UK again, and we're seeing a lot of appetite amongst developers to do so. We thought it would be useful to remind everyone that there's a lot of expertise out there from the initial wave of onshore wind decades ago that can be brought and learnings that can be brought to these types of projects. So I'm delighted to be joined by Charlotte and Camilla, both who are involved in the energy team here at Burgess Salmon. Welcome.
Thank you.
And today's topic is going to be joint development agreements. So let's kick off on that because we are seeing a lot of developers across all of the renewable energy technologies using these types of instruments. And I suppose to you, Charlotte, JDAs, why are they so popular amongst the developer community?
Thanks, Ross. So JDAs can take quite a number of different forms, which we'll touch on in a bit more detail shortly. But across the board, in general terms, JDA is a way of documenting a partnership between two parties that have complementary interests. So if they're structured well, then they can deliver benefits to both parties. So typically the two parties involved would be a developer who wants to go out and identify potential new projects and then develop those and ultimately sell them on. And on the other side, an investor who wants to fund and ultimately purchase those projects. And the advantages for both sides, on the developer side, it's really about cost and risk sharing. Mm-hmm. So developing a new energy project is inherently risky. There are various points at which it could fall down in relation to grid capacity, planning permission, etc. And there's quite a lot of upfront capex involved, particularly for wind projects, which are typically more capex intensive than, for example, solar, which is one of the reasons why we found them really popular last time around. That it gives the developers the benefit of getting a bit of cash injection up front and sharing some of that risk if the projects don't succeed. On the investor side, it gives them the benefit of being involved at an early stage, so they get to have a bit of a say in how these projects are developed around budgets and timeframes. And it gives them access to a pipeline and a certain level of exclusivity over projects. Given that, particularly, as you say, in England, there's going to be a bit of a resurgence in wind, we're expecting that it could be quite competitive for interested investors to get their eye in, really, with these projects.
Well, that's a pretty full explanation. Thanks very much for that, Charlotte. To bring you in, Camilla, I suppose I should have started with this question, but when we talk about joint development agreements, they take many forms, don't they? And they're called lots of different things. So maybe if you could just touch on what is a JDA in terms of what terms are referred to, and what those documents are called by various different parties, but also how are they typically structured as well?
Thank you, Ross. So, yes, many names, and we use the term joint development agreement, but as Charlotte says, it's a form of joint venture. But collaboration agreement, a pipeline agreement, development services agreement is another popular one that's used. And fundamentally, in terms of structuring, there's a huge variety. They're all very bespoke and will very much depend on the nature of the parties, the services or finances or other things that they're bringing to the arrangement. So you can have a contractual arrangement where you just have a simple contract between the parties, which will set out what they're bringing to the table, what's expected of each party, the rights and obligations, and the liabilities that's expected of them. They're very often structured through a corporate arrangement, so you would form a new vehicle which the two parties would invest in, take equity in. They may also lend into that vehicle, and then that vehicle will either buy in or may form SPVs under it in which the projects are then developed. So a huge variety of structures, and there is no one size fits all. The other thing I think to say is that in terms of the legal documents, some people take the view that you can go with a very short sort of heads of terms type structure, mm-hmm. which might, I mean, it would be binding, but it's a lot of it is left to be agreed later. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you can have a very detailed legal agreement which will provide, and it might have a number of appendices attached to it for management services, a sale and purchase agreement to buy in an SPV once it's ready, and lots of detail, so that the parties, everything is pre-wired and there's very little to be agreed later by the parties.
Thanks very much, Camilla. Back to you, Charlotte. So I suppose here we are, we've got a joint development agreement. A client comes to you. What would you be saying to them about some of the things to consider at the outset, some of those points before you enter one of these agreements?
Sure. I think the most fundamental one is determining where they fall within that spectrum that Camilla just described. Before you instruct your lawyers to put pen to paper and really get into the detail of it, you need to have a general commercial agreement around what structure you're going for and generally what level of detail you're going for. And that can avoid a lot of wasted time and expense, just making sure that you have that general agreement going in. I would also say the other thing is just really going in with your eyes open in terms of the different issues and really the what if scenarios. I think often JDAs can be underestimated in terms of their complexity, and certainly if everything goes to plan, they can be pretty straightforward in their operation. But a very important part of documenting it is going through those what if scenarios. So what happens if things don't go to plan, if you go over budget, who approves changes to that, if your planning application is rejected, who decides whether an appeal is put in, and ultimately if a project can't be developed or purchased through the JDA structure for various reasons, how is ownership dealt with, and in what circumstances can one party buy out a project to develop individually?
Okay, so quite a few things to consider. Ultimately, it's the success of these is around being a partnership, isn't it? And considering in that and recognising that I know, Camilla, you said that you can document it to the 8th degree, but there will still be gaps there. So the parties, like any joint venture, need to be able to get on and work through those. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay, so look, rounding this all up, probably a question to both of you. Key pinch points and maybe some top tips. Maybe Camilla, if I start with you, key pinch points in these agreements and your top tips to people entering them.
Definitely to go in with your eyes open. Yeah. I think speaking to, I would say come talk to us, but we've got experience of a lot of different structures that have been deployed. The contractual ones, the corporate ones, the short form versions and the long form versions, and just thinking about, what's best for you, what is your budget, how solid is the pipeline, is this for one project or is it for several projects, how long is the relationship going to be, and we will work through with you what you should provide for if things do go wrong. Everyone obviously approaches these with very positively. It's exciting, it's a new venture, but you do have to look at the difficulties as well and the challenges and how you would deal with those in the documentation.
And anything to add from you, Charlotte?
I think I would just add the need for being as clear as possible in the documentation. I think a lot of people talk about different stages in project development in general terms. For example, ready to build is a very commonly used phrase as being the trigger point for sale of the project usually. And when you get into the weeds of it, there can be a lot of debate around what that actually means. People can have different views. So just thinking through those sorts of things and other key trigger points in a lot of detail up front and being as clear as you can in the documents, just in case there is any debate further down the line.
And ultimately the end of the relationship as well. How are you going to exit? Will one of you be able to sort of buy out the projects? Is it pre-wired at the start that one will take the projects? Would you sell the entire venture to somebody else? So that's also something that's important to focus on, even though you're just at the beginning of that journey.
Well, thanks both. That's been really useful. I should point people to the fact that we've done webinars and other articles around joint development agreements, probably going into a little bit more detail. If you're interested in those, they'll be on our website, so you can go to that. And this podcast will also be on our website and on our social media channels. So feel free to go to this or any others we've done in the series on onshore wind. Thanks both.
Thank you.